Yeah, I love this quote. The art of originality is the ability to hide your sources. And I think I've stolen from so many people that I've developed my own style. Initially, like the piece I wrote with Robert Washburn, I wrote a piece called Reticulum. It's my first band piece, 1974, which I don't even know if I can find the score, but it sounded like Francis Macbeth meets Bob Washburn at William Schumann's house.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johan de May, will include clinics, master classes, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, onto the episode and this week's guest, Jack Stamp. Hi, Jack. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this interview and happy to share your story and your wisdom with my guests.
Well, I appreciate that.
So, Jack, can you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you're doing and where you are and what you've done?
Well, yeah. I mean, currently I'm retired from full-time teaching. I was the director of wind band studies at Indiana University of Pennsylvania for 25 years and served as the assistant chair for 7 and then chair of the department for 6. So I spent the bulk of my career there, though I spent 7 years at Campbell University in North Carolina and then spent another 4 years earlier teaching high school in Wilmington, North Carolina. But currently, I'm retired. I do a little bit of adjunct teaching at University of Wisconsin River Falls, and in fact, this fall of 2018, I'm doing a sabbatical replacement at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, as director of bands there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know where Luther is.
And my background is I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so that's a pretty big metropolitan area, and didn't really want to go to the University of Maryland. It was pretty big even back in the 70s when I went to college. It was about 35,000 students there. But both of my high school and my junior high band director went to schools in Pennsylvania. They went to Mansfield. And I started looking to Pennsylvania, and I didn't see a whole lot of percussion. My instrument's percussion, and I didn't see a whole lot of percussion activity in Mansfield, but I saw it at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. So I went there and got my got my undergraduate degree in music education, which is kind of interesting because that was 1972 to 76. And then in 1990, I actually went back there to teach. But following that education degree, I went on to East Carolina University and got a master's in percussion performance. And that lasted till 1978. At the time I got my high school teaching job at John T. Hoggard High School in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I taught there for 4 years. And then got a college job at a small college in North Carolina, Campbell University, which was closer to Raleigh. And the one reason I looked into that is because I had a chance to sub in the North Carolina Symphony as an extra percussionist, and it was a little closer. And then during that time, I started my doctorate initially at the University of Northern Colorado. Eugene Corporon was there, and then he left and went to Michigan State University, and I followed him there and finished my doctorate in 1981 not in 1981, I apologize, 1988 at Michigan State University. So I have a doctorate in wind conducting, actually. I have no degrees in composition, though I studied composition along the way. And in 1974, in the summer of 75, I studied composition with who I consider my main teacher, Robert Washburn, great band composer who taught up in Potsdam, New York. And then summer of 82, spent some time with Fisher Tull in Texas one summer. And then off and on did some studying with people like Joan Tower and David Diamond and more recently Richard Danielpour.
Can you tell everybody your origin story, like how you got started into music when you were a kid?
It's kind of interesting. My grandfather was a pretty good musician. He, though he wasn't necessarily formally trained as like formal schooling. I mean, I think he took lessons and things, but didn't go to college or anything like that. He was born in 1889. So, but the point being, he was a very good pianist. And my mom told me during his younger days, he was actually hired to sing in churches as soloist, like a tenor soloist. But he taught me chopsticks. I'd sit on the bench with him when I was a little kid, play chopsticks, and he would harmonize it for me. And then we inherited his piano. He had an old Lester piano made in Philadelphia, I think in the 30s or something. We inherited that. He bought a Wurlitzer 2-manual organ. He wanted to have an organ. So we got his piano. And actually it was for my sister to take lessons because she was 4 years older than me and she started piano lessons. But I used to noodle around on the piano and eventually taught myself how to read chord symbols and then would buy, at that time, you're talking now mid-late 60s, you could buy sheet music for pop tunes. So they would come out, maybe Blood, Sweat, and Tears would come out, and a sheet music of one of their tunes would come out. And there was pop music at the time, like Frank Sinatra's, it was still going, and those things, they'd come out. So I'd buy them, and I'd sit down at the piano, and of course, I wasn't reading any of the left-hand chords. I was reading the guitar chord symbols and then playing the melody, and I was teaching myself pretty much like I could play out of a fake book, in other words. And so that's how kind of I started writing little tunes with a friend of mine. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's true that it was trying to, impress girls with writing rock and roll tunes. And it didn't work very well, but I was always noodling on the piano, though I had no formal training when I was in high school. I did take formal training. I started percussion lessons in the summer of 9th grade and took private percussion all the way through high school. And that was a great help to me. And the high school band I was in was outstanding. And I didn't know anything different. I mean, we were playing pieces in the high school band like Lincolnshire Posy and the Persichetti Symphony and Toccata Martial and all these big band pieces. I thought that was the norm. But, as I saw once I graduated, that wasn't the norm. But those pieces and that experience of actually just striving for excellence molded me to be prepared to go to college. And that's how my music career started. I played percussion. I played drums in jazz band. I did a lot of summer stock theater in the Washington, D.C. area. They had back then they had a thing called dinner theaters. And they would do shows. You would have come for a buffet dinner, and then there would be a show put on. And I played a lot of shows. I probably have played maybe 45 different musicals in my life. And most of those happened between like the age of 18 and 28, probably.
Wow. I'm listening to your story and I think about your bio. You've done so much.
Well, I've had lots of opportunities. Let's put it that way. One of my favorite quotes is, as the definition of luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I've been lucky, but I've prepared myself for certain opportunities that have come. And I feel like those opportunities came that I was lucky to be able to take advantage of.
Yeah. I just had this conversation with Mark Scatterday the other day, and my wife and I believe I don't know, it was a football player who said it, but the more I work, the harder I work, the luckier I get.
Yeah, that's a great quote, because that's true. That's true. It's true in it's true in music. It's true in business. I think it's true in anything.
Yeah, because what luck really is the ability to take advantage of an opportunity that comes to you.
Exactly. Not let it pass by.
All right. So, I have a lot of listeners of the podcast who are high school and middle school band directors. And I like to ask my guests if they have any memories from their middle school or high school band director, and if there's something that they still carry with them and they're teaching today.
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, there's a gentleman, his name was Ramsey Meredith. And Ramsey was the junior high director, had gone to our high school and gone to Mansfield, followed the high school director. I say followed him, but followed in his footsteps and went to this college in Pennsylvania. So they were both teaching. So in other words, his high school band director was actually then my high school band director, and he was the junior high director, but he was also my percussion teacher. So first taking percussion lessons at ninth grade really started getting me to read music, read rhythms. I played, he made me play mallets. It wasn't just snare drum and things like that. But then the gentleman in the high school's name was Don Smith, and what's beautiful, he's still alive. He lives in Mesa, Arizona. I visit him at least once a year, and I call him my musical father because he planted these seeds of excellence. I just remember playing all this great literature. I remember having an opportunity to play the Persichetti Symphony. One of my great favorite stories of that, there's a county festival. I mean, they call it assessment now, but it was pretty much, they called it a county festival, then it was adjudication festival. And we were playing the Persichetti Symphony for this adjudication festival. I think I was a senior that year. And we're playing the second movement. And again, as a percussionist and a high school percussionist, I'm not enamored with the second movement when I'm 18 years old or 17 years old. I'm enamored with the movements that make me look good on timpani. And I was playing timpani at the time. But I remember, and this is a quote from Frank Battisti. He says, "Art experiences should wound you. You should have scars for life." And I remember the first time I was wounded and I didn't know it. So we finished playing the second movement, not much timpani. And I looked off stage, and our other junior high, there was another junior high band director was standing there, and he took his glasses off and wiped his eyes. And I went, "Is he crying?" And I was kind of like Tom Hanks in League of Their Own. There's no crying in band. Come on. We called him Doc. I would say, "Doc, watch the next movement." I cross hands and do all kinds of stuff on the timpani. But I realized I'd missed something. I'd missed something really important about music, and it taught me to come outside my own part and really listen to the band. And again, this exposure, one of the exposures to music Don Smith gave me was playing the Washburn Symphony for Band, which I still think is a terrific and very underrated piece. But that got me turned on to Robert Washburn, and then eventually I followed that course and was able to connect with him and study with him 2 summers. So, I mean, I think about the performances. I think about certain pieces we played and just the demand for excellence, and that if you can accept that and not balk at it, it really, really sets a nice standard for the way you approach music in the future. And that was all set in me when I was 15 to 18 years old.
So, Jack, I'd like to connect the narrative a little bit between how things happened. And so I know that you said before your master's or after your master's, you started teaching high school?
After my master's. So I had an undergraduate in music ed and then a master's in percussion performance. And then I started teaching high school in North Carolina.
Sure. And so what was that high school teaching experience like, and what led to you getting the position at Campbell University? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I inherited a great band at John T. Hoggart High School. The gentleman had been there, Jack Pindell was his name. He had been there 16 years. He had been there since the school opened. But he decided he wanted to, and I say it's the typical, but it's the family person that doesn't want to be gone Friday nights for marching band and things like that, and downsized the job. So he went to the junior high, and a very effective junior. He was a great teacher. It didn't matter what level. But I assumed this very good this position, and had all staters in the band. And he had established in the band program a lesson system through the Rubank method, advanced method. And it was kind of required that if you wanted to get a certain grade, it was in your hands to play off lessons in the Rubank book. So, of course, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I kept that going on and changed very few things my first year at the school, and got the jazz band really going a little bit more. I mean, when I was there, we commissioned a piece for the jazz band from Hank Levy, who, I don't know if you know that name, who wrote for the Kenton Band. And we commissioned Robert Washburn to write a piece. He wrote a piece called Kilimanjaro, which, then multiculturalism wasn't even heard of. We're talking 1981 when he wrote that. But I pursued the same excellence that I was taught to pursue in my high school and my undergraduate. I should mention a gentleman named Gary Olmsted, who was my percussion teacher, who set a discipline in his students for practicing and being self-aware and self-responsible. So I brought that to the school. It's interesting. These kids thought I was way older than I was. I think I was 24 when I started that job. And now we've even had a reunion, the Jack Stamp years at Hoggard High School. And these kids have all come. I say kids, they're in their 50s now. Have all come back and talked about, and they remembered stuff. And, for the first year, I'm hanging on by my fingernails. It's my first job, and I'd never written marching band shows and things like that, but I was doing all that. And sometimes I even dream about that job. And there are some times when I wish I'd never left that job. I'm not sure I'd be doing what I am doing now, but there are some really wonderful things about that job and I learned so much about teaching when I was doing that. And that situation, I had two bands, and occasionally we'd have a theory class, but jazz band was part of the curriculum. It didn't have to be before school or after school. And one year I had to teach English. Can you imagine a band director teaching English?
Oh, I absolutely can.
But I didn't have really credits. And it looked on my paper like I had credits in English, but I really didn't. It was an intro to the arts theater class that had an ENG prefix. So then it looked like I had an extra 3 credits. But it taught me a lot about teaching. It taught me a lot about human nature, dealing with students. And again, I guess what I miss about high school teaching, I think when you teach high school or when you teach public school students, you have a more of effect on their personal lives and their growth. Teaching college, I have these students who remember things I said and have been successful in their teaching, and in that aspect, I was very influential. But I remember having a student that came to me years later that I taught in high school, said, if it weren't for you, I'd have never finished school. And when somebody tells you that, you realize how important you are as a teacher to these young individuals who are in your band and getting way more from band than just music.
When I took my high school job after my master's degree, it was at a Catholic school, and there were 12 kids in the band, and I had to teach 1 period of band, and I had to teach 2 English, 2 history to fill out my load.
Wow.
And so by the time I left, I had 85 kids, and I was down to 1 history class. So it was one of those deals where it was like I needed to grow the band to survive.
Oh, yeah. I understand that. Yeah. Well, and you were asking me how I transitioned then to Campbell University. Well, I had seen, and this is another revelation moment in my life. In 1982, I'd gone to a workshop at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, in which this guy named H. Robert Reynolds was doing. I'd just heard about him. I'd heard of him. I'd never seen him conduct. I knew he was at Michigan, but somebody said I should go. So I went. And when he started conducting, I said to myself, I have personally no clue what I'm doing up there. I am conducting, it should be called malpractice. When I saw him conduct the first time, this is one of my favorite stories to tell, is that I went up to him and I said, what are you doing for lunch, Mr. Reynolds? He said, well, I'm just going somewhere. I said, can I take you to lunch? I've never been shy, by the way. So he said, sure. So we went to lunch, and I said, I knew I'd already had a master's degree, but I knew doctorate was out of the question. So I said, what are the requirements to get into your master's program in conducting? And he said, well, I don't know if I can tell you that. Here's what I'll tell you. If you were one of my master's students and I had a family emergency occur on Sunday, I could call you and you could do a rehearsal of Stravinsky's Symphonies of Wind Instruments on Monday and conduct the concert on Tuesday. Now, I said to myself, Stravinsky wrote a piece for band? I had never even heard of the piece. I had never even been exposed to the piece. And I thought, oh, I am so far behind. So I took a paper napkin, pulled a pen out of my sport coat and said, name some of the pieces that you think this graduate student should know. He goes, well, Symphonies of Wind Instruments. He goes, Stravinsky Octet. And I went, really? To myself, really? He wrote another one? And then he talks about the Mozart Serenades. Again, never heard of it. Talked about Dahl Sinfonietta. Never heard of it. Mentioned the Hindemus Symphony. I went, boom, I've heard that. I've even played that. But probably 60% of the pieces he told me I'd never heard of. So then my job, I felt, was to find out about those pieces. And it wasn't like now where click on YouTube and it's there, or click on Amazon and you can find a CD. I mean, it was, there was those Fennell records were just being re-released on Mercury, and it was tough finding recordings and scores. But you worked on it and you tried to get them. But so I was really into that, and I went that summer to University of Wisconsin in Madison, where he did a week-long workshop, and very influential again. And then when I came back, a friend of mine who was the band director at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where I was teaching high school, he was a college band director. He said, "Hey, Jack, Campbell University called me and asked me if I was interested in their band position, because I had applied for it when it was open several years ago, but I'm not interested. But it's open again, and I thought you might be interested." So I called them and literally went up for an interview and they were out of school. It was the end of June, July. There was no band. There was no anything. Had some pretty good recommendations. Again, I had no doctorate at the time. I got this college job without a doctorate. I had 4 years teaching experience and a master's, and I got this job at Campbell University. Well, then when I went and researched, the Campbell band had 16 members signed up for it. Now, that spring, my high school band for the Adjudication Festival did La Fiesta Mexicana and Persichetti Divertimento. And then I'm showing up to this school that has 16 kids signed up for band. So I went through every freshman's folder. And that time, nothing was computerized. This is the summer of '82. Nothing is computerized. And I went through every kid's folder to see if they'd had band, wrote down their name, address, sent them a letter. And I think when school started, I had about 35 in the wind ensemble at the school. So I probably had 35 people in the ensemble that first semester, and eventually built it. And again, in this situation, small private school, I was teaching everything. I taught, in fact, my first semester there, I taught class strings until I got them to, and class brass. And I got them. There wasn't a class percussion. It was class brass and percussion if you got to it, So I was able to change the curriculum, get a string person hired, get a brass person hired. But I taught jazz band, brass ensemble, composition, theory, just pretty much everything. But I talked about at Hoggard High School, I learned how to teach. Boy, at Campbell University, I really learned how to teach.
Well, let's talk about conducting then for a moment, because as I mentioned, we do have a lot of young band directors and a lot of band directors who just would want to hear some wisdom. And so could you talk about your time at IUP as a conductor and maybe share a couple of bits of wisdom with my listeners?
Right. Well, the first thing I want to tell them is that you're never too old to learn. So when I saw this Robert Reynolds workshop, you need to know that I was conducting with my baton in my left hand, because that gentleman, Don Smith, who was my high school band director, he was left-handed. He conducted left-handed. And when I was in college, I found the conducting teachers that would let me conduct left-handed. But then when I tried to go to doctoral school, that all changed, and I switched hands. So I switched hands. It would be the summer of 1984. And so I was 30 years old. And I switched hands from left hand to right hand, started conducting. And what Gene Corporon said to me is, if you're the band you're going to conduct, I should say, if you're only going to conduct the band you're conducting right now for the rest of your life, it isn't going to matter. But if you ever go for an audition, you're going to be prejudiced against, because it's going to look wrong. And he said, I can't let you get a doctorate knowing that's going to happen to you. So he accepted me if I switched hands. Now, in retrospect, I wouldn't have done that I probably wouldn't have accepted me to a program like that way. But he saw something, and again, he's one of those people that if it weren't for Eugene Corporon, I wouldn't be talking to you right now about any of this. He may be the one person, the most influential person in my musical life. I mean, there are these stepping stones along the way. Compositionally, it would be Bob Washburn, but certainly from conducting, it would be Gene Corporon, because he was willing to take a chance with me. So So the IUP job opens, and I get the job, and I go there. It was interesting. I went there following the band director that was my band director back in the 70s. He retired, but there was a buffer in between us of a year, and things were okay, but things weren't great. Um, and the idea that to to get the wind faculty back together and all on board toward to supporting the band, and that didn't take long. And what had happened is that the former director of bands, who was my teacher, the older he got, the more influence he got. So he was only doing the wind ensemble. That was it. He was doing the wind ensemble, teaching clarinet. And when I came aboard, they gave me two bands. They gave me the wind ensemble and the symphony band to do, which I totally enjoyed. But the symphony band was low in numbers, and that's why they gave it to me. And eventually, the symphony band got to be 114 players, so we had to start a third band called the concert band, and then that started with about 35 players, and that eventually got to about 70. So we had three bands at IUP, and I guess what I tried to do was things that I thought were missing in my college career. And the things that I felt that were missing were playing new music, commissioning music, getting composers to come in and talk to us, also playing some of the great classics. I remember, uh, again, pieces like the Dahl Sinfonietta, the Hindemus Symphony, the uh, Emblems of Copeland. Never played any of those. Not any of those in undergraduate. So my idea was to raise the level of the repertoire being played. And when I took that IUP job, I was teaching the two bands, and I was teaching class percussion. I wasn't, or percussion methods, which most people call it. I wasn't teaching conducting. Yet I was the only person on the faculty that had a degree in conducting. But it's kind of that hierarchy of and the political nature of higher ed that eventually, when there were retirements, then I started teaching conducting and tried to revolutionize that. I think in some ways, my legacy at IUP, though we had a lot of recordings, and I believed in recording and recording. I started recording uh, initially with the band, and that with my university wind ensemble and symphony band for recruitment purposes, because I thought the old way of recruiting, the tour, was not very cost effective, where I could put a recording of us in every band director's hands in the state for a lot less money. So we started doing a lot of recording. But then a friend of mine, Bruce Leak, who's a recording engineer, he's recorded all the teaching music through performance and band recordings. He was most of the Air Force band recordings you'll see. He was recording engineer, worked for Telarc. Anyway, Bruce was a good friend because I was producing Gene Corporon's recordings and Bruce was recording. But he said, "Hey, we need to do a recording of your music." And I said, "Well, who's going to play it? I mean, who should?" And he said, "Well, your students." I said, "I can't do that. I can't make my wind ensemble play a whole recording of my music." He goes, "Well, see if the faculty will do it." So the first recording of the Keystone Wind Ensemble was a third faculty, a third alumni, and a third current students, which I made sign a waiver saying, I'm not required to do this. I'm doing this because I want to, kind of thing. And that first Past the Equinox recording of my music that was on Citadel Records was done with that ensemble. But that was the impetus for the Keystone Wind Ensemble, which recorded something like 15, 16 discs. And you had to be a member of that group, you had to be associated some way with the university. Either you went there, either you taught there, either you used to teach there, you retired from there, whatever. And everybody was. And that was a unique ensemble. And so, although I'm going back to what I was saying before, I'm tying it back together. My legacy could be in some of those recordings. I think where my legacy is the students I taught in conducting. I think I made a real difference in how students approach the podium and approach the classroom from the podium side of things. And I think I really, if anything, I changed at IUP. It was how they did that and how they would approach it. And I mean, one of my favorite compliments is when somebody will say, or somebody will come up, one of my former students will come up to me and say, yeah, I guest conducted, or I did this conducting. And they went, "You're a Jack Stamp student, aren't you?" And I don't mean that they copy me, but there's a certain that school of thought that Corporon kind of instilled in us. That's part of the Reynolds philosophy and all. I was able to teach because conducting, there was no art of conducting in the 70s when I was, for the people that taught us, the people that taught conducting in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was no art of conducting. They watched what Toscanini did. That's why you had the pretty angry tyrant type band directors, because Toscanini, Reiner, those guys were pretty dictatorial in their approach to music, and you didn't have a real teaching philosophy of conducting and rehearsing and things like that. So anyway, at IUP, I had a lot of students and felt very successful there, and hoped to change some things. As chair, I didn't get to change as many things as I wanted to because of certain budget cutbacks. You tend to be a fireman rather than a person who blazes a trail. But the recordings of Keystone, where I tried to record American music that had been forgotten, and then my teaching of how many students I saw that went out to teach music, have gone on to teach music and had very successful careers. So it's probably what I'm most proud of. But I always say that as a teacher, our legacy is not trophies and superior ratings and recordings and things like that. Our legacy are our students. And in that respect, I'm very, very happy and very proud.
So, Jack, let's talk about your time as a composer and what was that transition to starting to write? I know that I was looking through your works. You have had some works when you were a student that go way back. And so when did you sort of move to composing more frequently?
The reason I took that Campbell University job as well was that I thought I'd have more time to compose. Now, when you're teaching as many courses I did, I'm not sure I did, but the freedom that a college schedule gives you compared to a high school schedule. And when I was teaching at Hoggard, everything I wrote was for the band. I wrote all my own marching band arrangements because I could write around our deficiencies. So we sounded good on the field. And I wrote for the jazz band, but I was not writing any really original stuff. Most of it was arranging back when I was teaching high school. So when I got to Campbell and I got closer to Raleigh, there was a really good band in Raleigh at John T. Enlow High School, and the band director's name was David Rockefeller. And David and I were in school together at East Carolina University. He was an undergrad while I was getting my master's. And I called up Dave and I said, "If I write a piece, will you play it?" And he said, "Sure." So I wrote a piece called Canticle. I think that was 1985. And he played the piece, and then later asked me to write him another piece. And then friends started to ask me to write pieces. But basically, my writing until 1990 pretty much goes unnoticed. And the beauty of that was that if I didn't like a piece, I could just withdraw it because nobody knew who I was. And then when I say what I say happened, and most of it's positive, but there's a little bit of curse involved. I call it the Gavorkna Factor. And when I wrote Gavorkna for a Cincinnati conservatory, my whole composing life changed. Gene Corporon calls me and asks me if I knew any fanfares that he could open his CBDNA Kansas City National Convention performance with. And he goes, "And I don't want to do fanfare for the common man. Everybody does that." I said, "How about Prelude to a Joyful Occasion by William Alwyn, British composer?" And he said, "Is that for full band?" And I said, "Well, no, it's for brass and percussion." He goes, "No, I want a full band fanfare." Now, I don't know if you go back and look. I don't know any full band fanfares before Gavorkna. Now, maybe there were, and there might be a piece called Fanfare and Chorale or something like that, but a piece that was written specifically like a Short Ride in a Fast Machine, like an opener, John. And in fact, that's the piece that influenced me to write Gavorkna, was John Adams' Short Ride in a Fast Machine. So I said to Corporon, I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll write this piece. If you like it, you can have it for free. If you don't have to play it." So it gets played at CBDNA, and I get tons of emails about how do we get a copy of this. And I sent out a lot of copies just for free, just to get my name out there. Well, then somebody says, "Hey, could you write a piece?" They want to commission me to write a fanfare that's a little bit easier. without all the double tonguing that high school kids could play. So I wrote Cenotaph, and but then I get kind of typecast as the fanfare guy, and I bet I have 9 or 10 fanfares that were all commissions that people asked me to write, because one, is inexpensive as far as a composer's fee because they're short, and two, it was where kind of my success was. So I started out writing a lot of these fanfares, which were again very successful and recorded by very good ensembles. So that's how it started. But the Gavorkna Factor, with that exposure, and then positive or negative, the drum chorus picked up Gavorkna and played it. And though I wasn't real pleased initially because they didn't ask me permission, and that's a long story which I won't go into. And they changed a lot of it. But still, more people heard my music on that DCI show than probably have heard my music in the rest of the time I've been alive. So the exposure was good. I just had to make sure people realized that I wasn't writing for drum corps, that I was writing that was written for Cincinnati Conservatory, and that they arranged it. But the exposure was pretty tremendous. So then I started writing, get more commissions that aren't just from friends. And I start writing the longer pieces. I write for people still without commission to show that I can write other music rather than a short 2-minute fanfare. So that's kind of how it started. But that all started in the fall of 1990, and that was my first year at IUP as well. So they kind of coincided.
And so would you rather talk about your process or about commissioning?
Well, let me talk to you kind of both. Let me weave them together really quickly.
Sure.
Initially, when I started composing when I was younger, I just pretty much beat on the piano until I heard something I liked and then write it down. And that's not really the way to do it. Now that I've gotten older and hopefully wiser, I think about a piece a long time. I think about the structure, I think about how I'm going to start it, or I think about what the impetus is going to be that creates the energy in the piece. And way before I write a note. And what that does for me, though, is by the time I'm ready to start writing, it's like I have this head full and this mouth full of music that I got to spit out, and I can start and hit the piece running. Now, depending on the commission or depending on the piece, depends on how I think about it. For instance, I was commissioned to write a piece for a high school band on Long Island, and she told me that her favorite piece of mine was Canticle, that piece I wrote back in 1985 for that friend of mine at Enloe High School. She said she thought it was emotional and powerful. So I said, okay, well then maybe I'll write a piece similar. I haven't written a piece like that in probably 20 years. So I found a poem by a World War I soldier, and it was called I Have a Rendezvous with Death. So I set a musical setting of that with a narrator for her. But I'm also then commissioned by a piece in the Twin Cities that says, I need to challenge these kids, and if you could come up with something that would challenge them rhythmically, I'd appreciate it. So I came up with this rhythmic motive that goes through all kinds of permutations. And when I'm writing for high schools or junior high, but public schools, my philosophy is I have to teach them something about music in my piece, not just make them sound good. So I remember I had a commission from honor band in the Panhandle of Florida. And I wrote a piece called, they just wanted like a fanfare or an opener. I said, okay, I wrote a piece called Panhandle Prelude, but it's based on the whole tone scale because I wanted to teach them about whole tone. I had another commission by a band in Western Pennsylvania near IUP where I taught, and I wrote a 12-tone piece, but I made it tonal because I didn't want people to be turned off by this incredible process of composition called 12-tone. So I wrote a 12-tone piece that's tonal with a study guide. So when I write for high school and school bands, I write with the idea of teaching them something about the compositional process or music within the piece. So in that way, that's my process for starting to figure out how to write a piece, gets involved in an educational way as well. And usually I get asked for a commission. It's got to be at least a year ahead of time. And even earlier is even better. So 18 months. And basically, I feel that they're hiring me to write a piece for them. So if they want to dictate the terms of the piece, that's fine with me. Now, I have the right to say, no, I don't want to write that piece then. But I also think if they say, well, write anything you want, I'll say, well, what's the level? Show me your instrumentation. Who are your best players? Who do you think could be a soloist? Do you have any different instruments that are not normally in the band? Like I wrote a piece for Appleton West High School in Appleton, Wisconsin. And he just came up with at the very end, well, probably the best player in the band is the bass player, electric bass player. I said, would you mind a piece that's kind of jazzy? Well, no. So I wrote a piece that featured the bass player. But again, I felt like I'm not writing a piece when I write for schools that I hope will get published. I'm writing a piece that I hope will teach them something and I hope fits them like a glove and has some meaning for them. And hopefully it gets published, but if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I feel like they've hired me for a particular service, and I can't whitewash that service by saying, well, I'm just going to write a piece and I hope it fits your band. They've hired me to write a piece for their band, and that's my job. And again, I mean, if it's too restrictive, I may not want to do it. But I find the restrictions, some of the restrictions that schools will put on me, help me focus more rather than restrict me from my creative juices.
Absolutely. Stravinsky was the one who said that the more limitations I have, the more creative I feel.
Oh, that's a great, I didn't know that quote. Yeah, you're right. I think that's right.
I have to look that one up, but it's something like that. Yeah.
But however, when you write a piece for the Air Force Band, you don't want to bore anybody.
Right. Sure.
And you got to make sure everybody's busy. Everybody thinks they're involved. Everybody has a decent part. Not that everybody shouldn't have a part in a school band piece, but there's a little bit different when you're writing for the best of the best. When you have that, my approach to that's a little bit different. And I have to think at a higher technical level maybe than I normally do for a school band piece.
Yeah, the Stravinsky quote, for the sake of being an academic, is whatever diminishes constraint diminishes strength. The more constraints one imposes, the more one frees oneself of the chains that shackle the spirit.
Well, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's from the Poetics of Music. I don't know the exact details.
Oh yeah, Poetics of Music. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, those were his Norton lectures. He did the Norton lectures up at Harvard.
Sure. Boy, that was a different time, huh?
Wow. That's why I wish there's part of me that wished I was in New York City in the 40s. You know, when Diamond and Copeland and Bernstein and all those guys were creating an American music. I think that would have been fascinating.
Yeah, I often think about Leonard Bernstein's, his lectures in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, I can remember his lecture on the Holst planets. And he said when Holst wrote this, he said Pluto there's all this discussion about Pluto now, but Pluto hadn't been discovered. He says, so we're gonna play Pluto for you. And the orchestra improvised with him conducting, and him looking at the brass a certain way and doing something to the strings. And it was amazing. And I remember going out and buying the Boston Symphony William Steinberg recording of the planets that day. It was my first classical first classical vinyl disc. And it was because of those young people's concerts that he did.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconner.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconner@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. All right, Jack, so where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I have strong feelings about competition in educational settings, where I think that some programs get driven by the competition aspect rather than by the aesthetic aspect. Granted, everybody says, well, there's competition in life, and I believe that. An individual competition in some ways is okay. But when you're an educator, your job is not to leave some people out for the good of others, but the idea is to bring everybody along with you. And my concern is that people have been evaluating programs, successes of programs, on successes of competitions. And competition doesn't have anything to do with music. I mean, I realize, there's a solo chair and people audition for orchestra positions, but you're still competing with yourself. You're not competing with anybody else but yourself. And when kids evaluate their experience by whether they won or lost, it makes me realize that they're not experiencing what music's all about. And that concerns me. And I think a lot of the educational, especially public grade school, I'm talking 7 through 12, are the impetus of their program is competition driven rather than aesthetic enlightenment. And granted, we have a lot of competition with that, with the iPhone and I call it the iBrain. But I remember one of my favorite quotes is that an exchange student was playing in an orchestra here in the States, high school orchestra, and they were playing 2 movements of a Mozart symphony. And they finished the first movement, and of course the conductor stopped because he's waiting for the judges to finish their evaluation and go on. And the string player said, "Why are they stopping? Why is he stopping?" And the American says, "Well, waiting for the adjudicators." She goes, "They're judging Mozart?" And I thought that was a great quote. How dare you judge Mozart? I know Craig Kirchhoff has a wonderful story about a band you heard play, and they were playing lay preludes or something like that, a transcription. And it was the first time he didn't know this, it's the first time this band ever gone to a adjudication festival, and they didn't play very well compared to the standard. And when he went in to do the clinic, they were all crying. And he thought they were crying initially because they felt they hadn't done so well. And when he saw the director, he goes, "I apologize." He goes, "This is just one of the biggest, most emotional experiences we've had musically, and it was just overwhelming for us." And it was like, oh yeah, that's why we do this thing. Not for some person to say, "Oh yeah, that kid that you talked into playing music that was on the streets or something, he doesn't matter because you better get a perfect score." And I'm thinking that the competition aspect doesn't take into account all the countless hours and the countless differences between the students to pull them together and make them feel important in the band room. And that's really our job. Our job is teaching humanity through music, not teaching band perfection. It's teaching humanity through the act of music, and teaching people how to feel and how to be, not how to win.
How have you achieved a work-life balance in your career, or have you?
I'm not sure I ever have. I know when my wife and I lived apart for 6 years when from my last 6 years at IUP, and then I moved up here to Wisconsin. And she tells me that she thinks she saw me more when I lived in Pennsylvania. So I don't know if my work-life balance, because I think when you're a musician, at least if you're successful, there's no difference between your life and your work. Is that your life is your work, or at least your life is music. So in other words, last night I was at the Dakota, downtown Minneapolis Jazz Club, hearing John Pizzarelli play. Now, my dad worked for the telephone company. He didn't take the phone off the hook and listen to dial tone at night when he came home. He had a job to provide for his family, but it's different when you're a musician. And though I have other things I love baseball in particular, so I do that. But you get absorbed in it. You get absorbed in music, and not that I do it now 24/7, but I'm still pretty involved in it. And I think you have to have an understanding spouse who, if you're in that kind of situation, understanding partner that understands that that's the characteristic of music. But I don't regret it. See, I don't have any regrets for that. I mean, I know I've made mistakes along the way in my personal life, but I would not regret the fact that I was a musician and gave it 100%, or at least what I think is 100%.
So now we talked briefly about it earlier, and I'm going to ask you about the challenges facing music education, but I'm wondering if you want to take a minute to talk about the Why Music Matters video. I'll definitely link it in the show notes for anyone who hasn't heard it.
My concern is that many people in authority in public schools, the people that make the decisions, whether it's a school board, whether it's a superintendent, whether it's some kind of government official or something, they have very little, for the most part, very little musical or aesthetic experiences in their lives. They can understand winning and losing. And it's always frustrated me. And we know the stories, the football coach that becomes the principal and things like that. And again, some of that has driven the competition aspect, because band directors, choir directors, whatever, feel that their administration could understand if they won versus if they had an aesthetic experience. So I initially used to talk about batting averages and things like that, and I talked a little bit about that. But then I realized that music and playing in an ensemble, singing in an ensemble, is the only thing that requires 100% participation from everybody. And so I decided that the easiest way for the novices to understand that was to do that 95% demonstration, playing one wrong note within 20. And of course, I tell them not to play it louder, not to play it softer, not to play the wrong rhythm, play it within context. I do maybe say a longer note's going to make more of an impression than a short note. But other than that, I mean, we practiced it once, and then we did this on. I apologize continuously to Frank DeKelly for destroying Shenandoah. But what I would do is, at maybe a holiday time, take a famous Christmas tune that everybody would know, and then do that to it. Just do that to it, and you see that it requires 100%, and that nobody sits on the bench. There's nobody sitting on the bench that they're all required to give 100%. And I always say to students, when you sit next to somebody that messes up a lot, does that make you play better or worse? They say worse. I said, exactly. I said, if you sit next to somebody better than you, does it make you play better or worse? And they say better. So I say to them, why don't you be that person that plays better than the person next to you so you can help them? So the idea is that everybody contributes to that synergy in the group. And that's just on a performance level. You're not talking about all the other things that music brings with the memory, muscle memory, and learning history through music. And I do this. There's that graphic. It has the word music, and then sliced through it is the word history and math and science or something like that, English or something, or literature. And I talk about how if I was teaching in the public schools, I would probably approach music, at least one piece every concert that related to one of the other disciplines in the school, and get that teacher involved. So like I would do Jack Stamp's Navigating Crescent 12-tone piece and get the math person in there. Or I do something based on a literary piece and get the English teacher in there. Or I'd get something that is maybe based on the overtone series, or something that shows the overtone series, get the science teacher in there. And really start working at showing the incredible dimension that music brings. And when you tie it into the schools, the other disciplines, then again, there's the idea that music is an academic subject and not a frill. The problem is music is used for so many other things, and that you hear it in the elevator, you hear it in the airport, you hear it. But the true meaning of music, and I think the true meaning of teaching music, is to take those students of yours, or those performers of yours, to another dimension, to that place where aesthetics live, and they get this touch or this sense of another worldliness that they don't have, they can't achieve by themselves. And people have talked about ensembles being a dinosaur. I don't think that's accurate. I mean, I don't think if the true meaning is to give them some type of aesthetic experience, the best way to do that is through an ensemble. If you're saying I'm going to give them a musical skill, well, then you start a trade school again, and that's not really the true meaning of education, nor the true meaning of music.
All right, Jack. So this is a question I ask everyone, and if you can think back to your 18-year-old self on the dais at your high school graduation, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say practice piano more. Of all the things musically, and I can make you think I can play piano, but I can't. I would tell everybody that goes into this profession, play piano. If you could play piano, it's going to make your life easier. And I would say never give up. I don't think I'd have to tell myself that. Something I've learned on the way is never give up. Some kid asked me, I was in Texas near Houston a couple years ago, and a kid asked me, have you ever had to give up your dreams? And I went, I've never given up my dreams. I still have dreams, goals, dreams, And I said, for instance, one of my dreams, one of my like bucket list things, which I knew I'd never be able to do, would be to play drums in the Tonight Show band with Doc Severinsen. I said, take Ed Shaughnessy's place. Ed Shaughnessy can't play. Jack gets to play behind the drum set. I said, well, guess what I did this year? Doc Severinsen came to our school, and I didn't get to play drum set, but I played vibes and extra percussion. So I did. I did get to play with Doc a little bit. Not quite the exact dream. I said, I said to the kid, if you give up dreams, you give up hope. And you can't, hope's what keeps us alive. And I think in your profession, in your personal life. So my suggestion would be, from a technical standpoint, when you go to music school, play piano. But from a philosophical standpoint, I'd say never give up your dreams. You may have to redirect your dreams, but never give up dreams.
That's good advice for anyone at any time. All right, Jack. And I don't ask this to be morbid. I ask us to get an honest answer. And that's, if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd conduct or hear?
Yeah, well, they'd be two different things. So if I was conducting, this says here, this is your last concert ever, I would conduct the Persichetti Symphony for band. But if it's the last piece I'm going to hear, and in fact, if I had a chance to conduct it with an orchestra, it would be what I consider the most beautiful piece of music ever written. It's the third movement of Vaughan Williams' Fifth Symphony, called Romanza.
All right, Jack. Is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
Oh, there was this piece I wrote, and the only reason I'm sharing this is because of maybe the timeliness of it, and the fact that it may be the most powerful piece I've written with the help of some friends. I wrote a piece for the University of Minnesota called Prayers for a Troubled Nation. And they premiered it and played it beautifully. And it's on my website. You can listen to it. But then shortly, and I'm sorry, well, the reason I wrote that is because that fall when I was writing is when all these shootings happened. These shootings of presumably innocent people, and then the return shootings of innocent cops. And so black individuals were being shot, cops were being shot. It was like the Wild Wild West again. It was like there was no civility in our country. And I decided to write this piece basically to demand civility. Well, then shortly after that premiere, in the fall is when, I think it was in the fall, it might have been spring, is when that march on Charlottesville happened. And this gentleman who owned a company in Minneapolis where he puts films to band scores. So I think it's maybe Robert W. Smith's Great Locomotive Chase. He has a film that syncs with the piece. And he's got a couple other pieces of pictures at an exhibition. You can sync it with the piece. And he wanted to sync a film with a piece I wrote called Scenes from Terezin, which is about the Nazi ghettos. And I said, I've written this new piece. I think you might want to listen to it. So he wrote this piece. He did this film that's kind of based on the Statue of Liberty and the poem on the Statue of Liberty. I want to say Grand Colossal. That's not quite the right name. But and all these images talking about America, the melting pot, what is America supposed to be, and puts that with my piece. And I watched it and I cried when I saw it. And I knew the piece, but it's this imagery that he puts with it. And it's called Ion Concert Media. You can just go to his website and put in Prayers for a Troubled Nation and click on it, and you'll hear the piece and see this. I'm not asking anybody to play it. that's fine with me. But you might want to watch it and see the power of music and this visual film. It's one of the things I'm most proud of, and I'm proud of Ion Concert Media for him. It's like he could read my mind. And we didn't really talk about the images he should use. He listened to the piece and came up with his own. But it's something I'm pretty proud of, so that I just want people to hear it and be touched by it.
All right, Jack, how can people get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest way is to go to my website, which is just jackstamp.com. And there's a link that sends it to my regular email address. And pretty much when that comes in, I answer them on my regular email so we can have further conversations. That's probably the easiest way, because I'm not really permanently associated with any school, so I don't really have an email that you can. I mean, people have tried to contact me, the school email, and it doesn't work because I'm not there long enough, or I really don't look at that email. So it's pretty basic. Just go to jackstamp.com and you can contact me through that, and it comes right to my email address.
Jack, thank you so much. This was a wonderful interview and a conversation.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm very honored that you'd want to talk to me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.